Hi there, and welcome to this video on GCSE Biology for the AQA Specification, focusing on variation and evolution, and in particular having a look at variation. I'm Shumina from StudyMind, where we help you revise GCSE Biology with our helpful video tutorials, tailored to your subject, your specification, and to you. If you're new here, make sure you click the subscribe button. Whilst you are watching, please leave any comments below if you're unsure about anything, and let us know if it's your first time watching our videos so we can send you our free revision materials. We also have helpful timestamps below for each part of the video to help guide you through the specification. So let's get started. Hello there, and welcome to this tutorial on variation. So in today's tutorial, we are going to be having a look at the definitions and explanations of what a genotype and a phenotype is. We will have a look at variation in and between species, and also come on to look at how mutations may lead to variation. So these are our specification points for today, and we'll come on firstly to some simple definitions. So a genotype is the collection of genes an organism has. So this is inherited directly from the parents. Now, we've come across this word before in previous tutorials, in the last set of tutorials on genetics. So we've already seen that the genotype is the kind of raw code that is encoded by the gene, so not necessarily what is presented by the person. But the phenotype is the physical characteristic of an organism. And so the phenotype is a result of the genotype, but also a result of the environment. So it's a combination of both the genetics and the environment that gives the phenotype. So all organisms all have different appearances and characteristics, i.e. different phenotypes. And as I said, it's determined by environmental and genetic factors. Now, variation is the differences in phenotypes in a population. So there can be variation in physical appearance, for example, so different weights, maybe social factors, so things like personality, or academic factors, and also many other things can also present with variation. So make sure you learn all of these definitions, so genotype, phenotype, and variation, because they will be really simple one-mark answers that you can get easy marks for in an exam. And we've come across genotype and phenotype before, so this should be really ingrained in your head. But just to reiterate, the genotype is almost like the raw code that's encoded by the genetics, whereas the phenotype is the presentation of the genetics in combination with the environment. Okay? So there are three main reasons for variation. So number one, genes. Number two, environment. And number three, a combination of genes and environment. So this, again, might be another three-marker question that comes up in your exam. So make sure you know that variation can occur due to genes, environment, or a combination of genes and environment. So the set of genes that have been inherited from the mother and father can control many characteristics, as we've seen in previous tutorials. So, for example, blood type is controlled by genes only, so there is no environmental influence. Other examples of genetic phenotypes are natural eye colour and the ability to roll your tongue. So by a genetic phenotype, we mean a phenotype that is influenced only by genetics, not by environment as well. Now, the environment can also play a large role in phenotype presentation. So, for example, an accent is controlled solely by the environment. Now, the majority of factors are not solely controlled by either genes or environment. It's usually a combination of both. So, for example, weight is a combination of genes and environment. For example, overweight parents with a low metabolism can have a light child because perhaps of environmental influences. Maybe the child eats less comparatively to their parents, for example. So this is because weight is controlled not only by genes but also by environmental factors, diet and exercise. So it's important to understand that normally characteristics involve a combination of both genetics and the environment rather than just genetics or just environment. Okay, so make sure you ingrain that into your head. So our reasons for variation are genetics, environment, but also a combination of the two. Now, so variation can occur within species or between species. And if variation is occurring within species, we refer to that as intraspecific variation. But if it's occurring between species, that's interspecific variation. And the way I remember this is that the stem inter, so if I just write that out for you, so the stem inter that means between, okay? So that will be between species. Whereas intra-specific is within species. So within species, individuals of the same species tend to have more similarities and less variation than individuals of different species. So they tend to produce similar proteins and have a similar body anatomy, but genetic variation is almost always present. So think of Homo sapiens, for example, so humans. We tend to have similarities to each other, so we have a similar body anatomy and we produce similar proteins, but we also have some genetic variation between each other. But comparatively, if we compare a human with a dog, so two different species, these two species have differing body anatomy and differing proteins within their body. So you can see how variation within species has more similarities than between species. Okay, so for example, with species A, within species variations, they have similar body anatomy, but perhaps they might be different colours. Now, variation can also occur between species, so we said this was interspecific variation. So individuals in different species tend to be very different and have lots of variation. So for example, humans versus dogs, or a lion has a tail whereas a human does not. So we can see differences between species B and species C are more dramatic than the intraspecific variation we saw within species A. So make sure you know the difference between inter and intraspecific variation. So remember, our inter is between, whereas our intra is within the same species. Okay, so between species B and C, for example, intra is within the same species, so variation that exists within species A. Now, mutations occur within genes sometimes. So you can have mutations with no effect, mutations with a negative effect, or mutations with a positive effect. So mutations aren't always a bad thing. That's basically what you need to gauge from this slide, because often we talk about genetic mutation as causing a type of genetic disorder and then disadvantaging the organism. But actually, mutations can also have positive effects, and we see this influencing natural selection, for example. So variation occurs within species due to mutations. Now, this is a key definition you need to remember here. So mutations are spontaneous random change in genetic material due to a mistake in replication. So make sure you include these words, spontaneous and random, because they occur randomly and they're not, that's the whole point of this concept, is that they are random changes due to a mistake in replication, and therefore they can cause a change in the phenotype of the organism. So, for example, when the genetic material is duplicated during reproduction, a mutation can occur leading to a change in genotype. However, this does not always lead to a change in the phenotype. So a mutation is basically a change in the genotype, because we're saying it's a random change in genetic material. Now, whether or not this leads to a change in the phenotype depends on how that gene is presented and how the environment influences it. So if the mutation in the genotype does not affect the final phenotype, we say that the mutation is silent because it doesn't present in the final phenotype. However, other mutations can affect phenotype and lead to the new organism having different features. So if the mutation is beneficial, it can give the new organism an advantage and can therefore be passed on to the next generation. Okay, so we can have good mutations, we can have positive mutations, we can have negative mutations, or we can have silent mutations where there is no change in the final phenotype. Now on to some practice questions. So which of the following statements is or are true? So A, a mutation is always negative. B, mutations definitely change the genotype. C, variation only occurs between different species. D, some factors such as blood type are solely controlled by genetic factors. So, perhaps pause the video at this stage and then we'll go through which answers are true and false. Okie dokie. So, A, a mutation is always negative. We know that to be false because, as we've just said on the previous set of slides, a mutation can be negative, positive, or silent. B, mutations definitely change the genotype. This is true because we know the mutations are change in the genetic sequence, therefore that is the genotype. It's just whether or not this then goes on to influence the phenotype. That's where it doesn't always happen, but mutations always change the genotype, just not always the phenotype. C, variation only occurs between different species. Again, that's wrong because we know there's interspecific variation, we know there's intraspecific variation. So yes, variation occurs between different species, which we would call interspecific variation, but we also know that variation also occurs between the same species, intraspecific variation, as we see within the human population. We all vary from one another. And D, some factors such as blood type are solely controlled by genetic factors. We know that's true, although we find that most factors are controlled by a combination of both genetic and environmental factors. But this statement is absolutely right because some factors such as blood type, eye colour, are solely controlled by genetic factors. So well done for today, that's everything covered, just some basic definitions that we've already covered in previous tutorials, so if you've gone through them before this video, then you might have found this a little bit more easy. But well done, and I'll see you for the next session.
Thanks for watching this free video from StudyMind. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe to catch our newest videos by clicking below, and leave a comment on a topic you'd like a video on. Click here to watch more videos in our series for GCSE Biology, or visit our website studymind.co.uk for free past paper compilations by topic and specification.